Now, a couple days ago, a new one-shot comic book called Age of Resistance Snoke came out, and like a lot of people I'd imagine, I was really hoping this comic would offer us a little something about this character, something that maybe begins to tell us who he is, where he comes from, what his motives are, and so on. You know, everything we were hoping the sequel trilogy would eventually give us until Kylo Ren killed Snoke and self-promoted himself to main antagonist of the trilogy, only to have the first teaser trailer for Episode 9 assure us that wasn't actually going to be happening, and it revealed that Palpatine was going to be coming back and would be the real threat in this last film of the trilogy and entire saga. Anyway, I know that at this point, a lot of you don't even care about Snoke anymore, that he just represents the wasted opportunity or potential of this trilogy. And though I might not be the biggest fan of the sequel trilogy era in general, I'm always open to a good story and learning more about the new canon's lore and hoping that something from this time period can still be salvaged, especially from those who write these books and comic books, because most of the time, they're people with a deep love and understanding and appreciation of Star Wars. And unlike the movies that are made to appeal to a general audience, books and comics can be created or catered more towards, if not almost entirely towards, the hardcore fans. They don't have to water down the story, and they can dig deep into the lore if they want to. I mean, if you ever wonder why arguably the old expanded universe is better and more beloved by the fans than the sequel trilogy, it's because the sequel trilogy was made for, well, everyone, for a wide audience, while the books and comics of the old EU were made for Star Wars fans. And as I've argued elsewhere, one of the reasons why the books and comics in the new canon are not as good as their EU counterparts in many cases is because the books and comics used to drive the story of the EU. They were the main event, if you will, because there were no movies to worry about or to drive the larger story. Whereas now, in the new canon that is, the books and comics are relegated to supplementary material most of the time, to enhancing or playing off what the movies are doing, and those who write them nowadays usually have their hands tied when it comes to what they can do or reveal with these stories. And nowhere does that feel more evident than in this new comic book about Snoke, because it's not actually about Snoke. We learn virtually nothing new about him. In fact, it's far more about Kylo Ren than Snoke, though we don't learn anything new about him either. Instead, this is just confirming or explaining further things we should already know about the character, and it doesn't offer too many hints about what his future may hold. Not anything that we can't already guess at from his actions in the movies. And look, before I go on here, let me just say that it wasn't a bad comic book. I actually enjoyed it for the most part. Problem is, it's just this random, short, isolated story about a moment in Kylo Ren's training. It comes off feeling like a small part or a short chapter that's taken out of a much larger story about Snoke and his corrupting and training of Kylo Ren that we're just not being given. And so a story that by its name tends to imply we'll learn something about Snoke is instead more about Kylo Ren and is pretty much just a tie-in to The Last Jedi after the fact, because it starts with Snoke training Kylo Ren, and he's doing that by holding him with the Force over the edge of a cliff, asking if he's afraid. Kylo, of course, says that he's not, and then Snoke lets him go, but Kylo manages to catch himself before smacking into the ground. And he then learns a lesson about how fear can be turned into anger, and anger can be turned into power. And throughout this comic, Snoke says things that are pretty much the exact opposite of what Yoda once said to Luke in The Empire Strikes Back, which is very fitting considering that after this first bit of training, Snoke then takes Kylo Ren to the Darkside Cave on Dagobah. On the way there, though, Kylo Ren picks up his helmet, but Snoke not only chastises him for being a Vader wannabe, but smacks him around a bit too. Then when we get to Dagobah, Snoke talks about how he fears and respects Luke Skywalker, that he is a very formidable Jedi. Kylo Ren then ultimately goes into the cave, and it's of course the very same one Luke went into many years before, and it's there that he confronts an image of Luke that he doesn't hesitate to attack and eventually kill. And all of this is sensed by Snoke, who is obviously quite pleased. The whole idea here is that Snoke wants Kylo Ren to kill the light side within him. And once dealt with, Kylo thinks he's done, but that's when an image of Han and Leia appears, and they begin to plead to his better nature. Snoke then feels the conflict and struggle within his apprentice and wants him to kill his parents. Then, with a few panels of angry Kylo Ren hacking away, the comic implies that he's attacked and killed them too, and Snoke seems to believe this as well, but it's soon revealed that Kylo, or Ben, couldn't do it and instead just hacked away at a cave wall. This, of course, ties into the fact that Snoke couldn't sense Kylo's true actions or intentions in The Last Jedi in the moments leading up to his death, and that his greatest weakness, meaning Kylo Ren, is very likely his parents, and more specifically Leia, since he was unable to kill her in The Last Jedi after killing his father Han in The Force Awakens. Anyway, getting back to the story, Snoke then says he wants to see, but that's when Kylo Ren just blows up the cave to cover up the fact that he couldn't kill his parents. Yeah, you heard me right, he blows up the Darkside cave on Dagobah using the Force, which is one of those things that maybe in a comic book works, but if they tried to do something like that live action, it would have just come off feeling cheesy. Either way, Snoke buys it as just being a display of Kylo Ren's powers, but he's still not happy because he wanted to bring other apprentices here in the future, but Kylo ends the story by saying he won't need any other apprentices. And so again here, all this comic book really did was reestablish things that we already knew about Kylo Ren and gave us absolutely nothing new about Snoke. Kylo even says something about letting the past be the past, which plays into the idea that he wants to let go of it, or claims he wants to let go of it, but that he likely can't escape this belief that, like his grandfather Darth Vader before him, he's destined for greatness, to rule the galaxy even, which I think was hinted at in The Force Awakens and will be explored much further in The Rise of Skywalker. Furthermore, I think it's clear that Leia will be a big part of any redemption arc Kylo Ren may have in the last movie here. They've even said that despite the unfortunate passing of Carrie Fisher, she'll still have a big part to play in this final film. We also know that originally the idea was that this was going to be her movie in a sense, in the same way that The Force Awakens was Han's movie and The Last Jedi was Luke's movie, I guess. Anyway, leaving speculation on Kylo's possible redemption for a future video, and again saying that I didn't think this comic was bad per se, that it was an enjoyable read at the very least, even if it did just reiterate things, it was still disappointing to once again learn absolutely nothing about Snoke. And no, I wasn't expecting a one-shot comic book to give us his full backstory in remarkable detail, but something at this point, anything, any little tidbit would have been nice already. Because what Rian Johnson calls subverting expectations by just killing Snoke in The Last Jedi and mocking fans before it came out who did have theories even though, turns out, he himself didn't have one, is pretty high on the Episode 8 disappointment list for me. And I know some of you will want to make the argument that he wasn't that important to the story anyway, or that since Palpatine never got any sort of explanation or backstory in the original trilogy, it means Snoke didn't need one here in the sequel trilogy. And so before wrapping this video up, let me quickly address those two things. First of all, Snoke is extremely important to the story. Not only is he somehow the one who created the First Order from the ashes of the Empire, but he's the one that turned Ben Solo to the dark side and indirectly defeated Luke Skywalker. The first line of the opening crawl of Episode 7 is, Luke Skywalker, or our hero from the last trilogy, has vanished, and he's vanished because of Snoke. So I'd say who that guy is pretty damn important. In many ways, in fact, this one character is the entire reason why the story of the sequel trilogy even exists or is being told. He is responsible for everything that has gone wrong since the last part of the story. He's no different than Palpatine in that respect, that he's the guy behind it all. Which will then, of course, lead to the argument that, well, Palpatine didn't get explained in the original trilogy. Hell, he never even gets called anything but the Emperor in the original trilogy. And yet that story, before the prequels came out, worked perfectly well without some detailed and elaborate story for him. Which is certainly true, but why do you think one of the things the prequels did, and did well, mind you, was give us the story of how Palpatine conquered the galaxy? Well, it's because to fully understand the story of Anakin Skywalker, not to mention to understand the bigger picture shown to us in the original trilogy, we had to learn Palpatine's story. We had to know something about the guy who turned Anakin to the dark side, and why and how he is the Emperor. And what this all boils down to is the fact that the prequels continued the story of Star Wars. They didn't start it like the original trilogy did, and thus more of a burden falls on them to not only elaborate and expand on things, but to align themselves with what happened before, even though the original trilogy technically comes after, and to make sure that the overall story is cohesive and that the audience can always understand how we got from point A to point B. And so considering that when Return of the Jedi ends, everything is great, or we can make the assumption that things are about to go well for all our heroes and the galaxy itself, but then Episode 7 starts and that's not the case, we need some sort of explanation as to what in the hell happened in the meantime. We deserve to know who Snoke is and how he's undone absolutely everything that was pulled off in the last trilogy. Because, again, Snoke is the one who brought about the First Order that would destroy the New Republic, which is what the Rebellion fought for and achieved in the last trilogy. and he also defeated Luke, who fought to help ensure the Jedi would return, yet they didn't return, and the New Republic would be destroyed halfway through Episode 7, and the guy responsible for both of those things happening just appeared out of thin air without any sort of explanation, and then he's killed off before we can even hope to get one. So forgive me for not applauding Rian Johnson's subversion of expectations, but instead rolling my eyes at his inability or refusal to expand on the larger story. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to let me know if you've read this comic and what you thought about it. Also, are you excited to one day learn more about Snoke, assuming we will one day learn more about Snoke? Or do you just not even care about him anymore at this point? Either way, let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.